I think I will invite Dr. Edimon Ginting as well as Dr. Mahinthan Mariasingham to join with me here now. Please come to the stage. Please give applause to them. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here this morning with you in this seminar titled The Evolution of Indonesia's Participation in the Global Value Chains. And we have a number of speakers today, but I think I will start by giving a brief introduction to this session before I introduce its speakers. As you know, that Indonesia is one of the countries that have seems to be able to escape from the resource curse hypothesis. However, despite its macroeconomic achievement, there are some indications that this country is suffering from lack of global competitiveness. And this might result in weak ties with global production network. And based on that consideration, then the Asian Development Bank, in association with the Islamic Development Banks, are trying to look deeper into this issue and to analyze more rigorously about Indonesia's participation in global production network by examining patterns of involvement in global value chains. So today we have our first two speakers here. Dr. Edimon Ginting, he is the Director of Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department of the Asian Development Bank. Applause to Dr. Edimon Ginting. And also we have Dr. Mahinthan Mariasingham. He is a Senior Statistician at the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department, Asian Development Bank. Applause to him. And these two speakers will introduce the book that they have co-authored. So basically, Dr. Edimon will present some overview of the report and some kind of introduction, why this is, what is there, etc. And then Dr. Mahinthan Mariasingham will present some key findings of the topics. So without further ado, I will give the forum to them. I give the floor to them, and each can be for about 30 minutes. And only after that, we will have other speakers for further discussion. So Dr. Edimon Ginting, I will give the first chance for you. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pak Moderator, Pak Akbar. Yeah. And let me also first thank Pak Rimawan for hosting us today. Pak Edi, my classmate, Pak Edi Purnawan, who always help us to be here. And I would like to acknowledge also my teacher, Pak Ong, and also my colleague that are all here today. It's always good to be back here in UGM. Here is where I study economics, and always good to share what we have learned out there after leaving this campus. I will just, rather than overviewing the report, I think I will just give you the context why this report is important in the current global economic development. Yeah, I think so. Here is what we are facing. Yeah, I think key message of my 5 slide is basically now the world is facing this global uncertainty because of US and China trade tension, and we have seen the impact rippling everywhere. And then interestingly, these tensions not only creating weaker growth in Asia, but also in the US, in developed country. Yeah, and then as a result, we are now economists are everywhere busy revising economic growth downward. And then we have a bit of good news in the region. You know, regional trade in the region actually been growing, but it's not enough to sort of to mitigate the damage. So in this context, how much the economy is actually affecting by this tension and so on is really depending on how you participate, depending on your participation in the global value chain. I think that is one thing that we should This is what I'm talking about in terms of trade tension. You see where is the, you see the blue bar there, the round blue inside is getting thicker and darker every day. You know, this means that the tariff and so on is rising, and it's enforced it's enforced even better. So the trade tension is intensifying, and at the same time, China is also retaliating. So we are now in a very difficult situation in terms of this trade tension. In fact, just recently, I think Pak Jokowi went to Bangkok for ASEAN meeting. ASEAN, and usually the head of state, even from the US, come to the meeting to discuss trade. But this time, Trump didn't turn up. So I think that's a sign again that the tension is not going to be ending anytime soon. So we are going to be having prolonged uncertainty, which will affect growth down the line. This is the impact now. Trade is declining in Asia. Fortunately, the value is declining more than the volume. But in a sense, we are facing, if we are talking about driver of growth, usually we mentioned about 4 drivers. One is consumption, second is investment, and third is government, and last is trade. I think trade now is weakening significantly in terms of driving growth everywhere in the region. Not only that, because of the trade war, investment is also weakening. So we have now 2 of the engines of growth in the lower capacity. So you will see, as a result of this, you know, despite sort of increasing interregional trade in the region, growth everywhere is declining. So recently, Asian Development Bank outlook, actually, we also revised growth in the region because of what happened in the trade arena. Yeah, but at the same time, as I mentioned before, growth decline is not only happening in developing Asia, but also in the US. US is also weakening, and the Euro area is weakening. So we are going to be facing declining global growth, and then the impact of that to many economies will depend on some of the things that we'll discuss today, global value chains, engagement, and so on. Yeah, and here is global growth and growth in the region. Indonesia, I think, on 5, stay around 5%, 5.1, and will be recovering a little bit to 5.2 in 2020. But everywhere you can see, most of the arrow are red and down. Growth everywhere is declining. One thing that is interesting to discuss is Vietnam. Vietnam is one of the countries who is kind of benefited from the trade war, and you will see they're not somehow, they're escaping some of this slowdown and so on. Yeah, other countries like Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, mainly because of commodity, they're oil exporting countries and so on, so they're helped by purely commodities. So, but everywhere, countries are facing economic slowdown. So this is the sort of the impact of the trade war that we are facing nowadays. Yeah, and Joseph will try to explain our engagement in value chains. I'm just giving you a hypothesis. The conclusions of the report is that while our engagement is actually improving, but remain limited, limited to some low manufacturing and primary commodities and so on. So what explained that? I have 4 things in my mind. What explain this? We can discuss further later. The first one is connectivity infrastructure. Global value chains is nothing more than, it's actually spurred, helped by cheapening of freight costs. And somehow Indonesia wasn't benefited from that because of the port. Our port sector is inefficient during the time when global value chains was rising. Yeah, I think our dwelling time was famously more than double of Singapore, so and so on. And our port, the biggest port in Jakarta, Tanjung Priok, doesn't actually is not able to cater a big ship, which actually leading the cheapening of freight costs everywhere in the world. And second is our trade and investment policy. Yeah, I think although we are sort of in diplomacy we're opening, but because of the difficulties on infrastructure, actually we're not opening fully because cost of export and import is high. But if you look at our tariff structure, the import is actually still difficult. Yeah, still quite high in some areas, and not only the tariff, but there's also non-tariff barrier and so on. So to be part of the global value chains, you need to have policy that is easy to import and export from the country, and that has been a problem. And some of the players in global value chains is FDI. Even China, initial involvement in global value chains was through FDI, and then their own FDI and their own investment and so on. So that is key. And secondly, I put here a skill and broader human resources constraint. I think when I was here in 2015, Foxconn want to come here to Indonesia. One of the constraints was skills for IT and so on. And for manufacturing in general, I think we have also a bit more inflexible labor market. And on the other front, I guess this is when one of our problem. Often we have a good policy, but coordination and implementation on the ground is weak because of silos and regional policies and so on. I think this is my hypothesis. This is something that we can discuss later. I think hopefully if this event will enrich our understanding on some of this issue. I think with that, I give the forum to you. Thank you, Brian. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Edimon. Pak Edimon has mentioned several issues that have been the context, have been the background of why we should have this kind of report from the authors. So now we should go directly to the authors, to Pak Mahinthan, for the presentation of the result of the study. So Dr. Mahinthan, Dr. Mariasingham, time is yours.
Okay, to start with, I am not a doctor. I don't have a Ph.D. but thank you. Neither. Okay, so first of all, let me just give you a brief introduction to the project and how we went about producing the results. What we did was we gathered data within a framework called Input-Output Tables Framework, which I hope most of you are familiar with. If not, after the presentation, you will certainly be. Right. Then we applied some cutting-edge methods to develop trade and value-added economic globalization statistics. Based on those statistics, we came up with some results. Okay, now the publication, the report, is a statistical analysis report. We have not attributed any reasons for the results, but we expect today to, during the discussions, get you to discuss about the results and give us the reasons. All right. So we have a very good gathering of experts as well as students from the university, and I would request you to participate in all the discussions here. All right. But again, we also expect you to ask questions and also expect you to answer our questions. If there are no volunteers, I will point out to someone and you will have to answer the question. Okay? Okay. So before I move forward, what I would like to do is I am going to introduce you to my team members who will also help me with this presentation because I think they are better presenters than me. So anyway, so let me introduce you to Krizia, Angelo, and Kristina. Okay. So given that this is also an academic audience, we will actually try and introduce the models to you because we hope that you will employ these models in your further research. And if you want more information on these models, you can please contact us and we will provide you the guidance. So we will introduce you to the models as well as the data and finally the results. All right. So before I hand it over to Krisha to go through the first set of models and the results, a quick question. What is the difference between gross trade and value-added trade? All right. For sure, at the end of this presentation, you will find the answer. But the quick answer is, in gross trade, a country may not make any income. But in value-added trade, a country will certainly make some income. That's a simple answer, but you will get a more elaborate answer at the end of this presentation. So why don't I hand it over to Krisha for the first set of models and the results, and then we will move on. Okay, thank you.
Hello. So good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Krizia, Garay. I'm part of Sir Joseph's team in ADB for GVC. Okay, so this is the outline for today's discussion. First, we will go over the data we used for the report. And then we move on to the production and value-added exports in Indonesia, and Indonesia's participation in global value chains. And then lastly, we look at the special aspects of GVC in the case of Indonesia. We conclude with some policy recommendations given the results that we see in the GVC report. Okay, so before we move on to discussing the methodologies and the different indicators that we used for the analysis in Indonesia, we need to understand first the data that we used for the analysis. So we used the multi-regional input-output table. Here is a simplified schematic of the MRIO. We simplified it into just 3 countries. We have country A, country B, and rest of the world. Okay, so we have country A, country B, rest of the world, and the industries. So the row-wise perspective gives you the total output that is produced by a country industry in the in the world economy. So total output is separated into intermediate use and final use. And if we add those, it gives us the total output. So the diagonals in the MRIO gives you domestically produced and domestically consumed products. So for example, this part gives you the intermediate products that are produced in country A, but also consumed in country A. And then the off-diagonal entries gives you the internationally produced and consumed products in the economy. Okay, if we look at the column-wise perspective, it's divided into domestically sourced inputs for the output of a country and internationally sourced inputs. If we add those to the value added of that country, it gives us the total input of that country, which should be equal to the output of the country. So this part should be equal to the sum of the rows. Okay? So Asian Development Bank has its own MRIO comprised of 63 countries and 35 industries or sectors. So we have MRIOs for the years 2000 and 2007 to 2018. And for the gap years, we use the World Input-Output Database, which has 43 economies plus the rest of the world, and 55 industries that are mapped to the ADB MRIO 35 industries. Okay, so now we move on to Indonesia's production and value-added exports. So this includes the structure of Indonesia's intermediate use and production, the value-added content in Indonesia's final production, and exports decomposition. So here, we see the structure of production and use of intermediates in Indonesia for years 2000 until 2017. So we see that in general, the use and production of intermediates in Indonesia is generally increasing, as given by the orange cross and the green triangles. So the blue bars shows you the nominal value of used and produced intermediates in Indonesia that are domestic. So if you look at that, we can see that most of the intermediates that are used and produced in Indonesia are domestically sourced. Okay. So the green line gives you the share of intermediates in Indonesia that are domestically sourced, while the orange line gives you the share of intermediates produced in Indonesia that are domestically consumed. And if you look at that, it's generally increasing, both of the shares. But post-global financial crisis, which is around 2009 to 2014, the shares decreased and then increased afterwards before decreasing by 2016. Okay, so we looked at the domestic perspective of the intermediate structure of Indonesia. Now we are going to look at the international perspective. Okay, so here we have the structure of the intermediate imports and exports in Indonesia for years 2000, 2007, and 2017. We separated it into broad sectoral categories. We have the blue part is for the primary sectors. The green part is for the low technology manufacturing sectors. The orange part is for the medium to high-tech manufacturing sectors. The light blue part is the business services, while lastly, the yellow part is for the personal and public services. So both use of imports and production of exports are highly revolving around the manufacturing sectors. So about 60% of imports used in the economy are used by the manufacturing sectors. Meanwhile, about 70% of the exports produced in the economy are produced by manufacturing sectors. So if we look more closely into the use of imports within Indonesia, we see that the use of imports by medium to high technology manufacturing is increasing from 2000 to 2017, while the use of imports by low-tech manufacturing remained the same, around 34%. The opposite can be said for the business services industries, wherein in in the year 2000, about 25.5% of imports in Indonesia is consumed by the business services, but then it decreased to 17.2% by 2017. Then if we look at the export side in Indonesia, the trends are a bit more erratic. For medium and high-tech manufacturing, the production of exports, the share of production of exports in Indonesia decreased from 39.2% in 2000 to 30.9% by 2017. For low-tech and for primary sectors, the trend is erratic. For low-tech, it initially decreased from 30.1% in 2000 to 28.5% in 2007, but then significantly increased by 2017 to 36.2%. The opposite is true for primary, wherein it started at 22.4% in 2000, increased by 2007, and then decreased again by 2017. Okay, so before we move on to the value-added composition of Indonesia's final production, we need to look at the concepts from which these analyses are rooted from. So all of the decompositions in recent vertical specialization and trade and value-added literature are rooted in the Leontief insight. So Leontief demonstrated that we can actually estimate the total amount and the type of intermediates that we need in producing $1 amount of cross output for a country industry using the input-output structures of different countries and industries. So this is how the Leontief insight is derived. So we have XS. This is the gross output of, let's say, country S. We can divide it into domestically produced and consumed intermediates and final products, and internationally consumed intermediates and final products. So if we change that expression into matrix notation and then do some manipulation in the expression, we get this formula, which is gross output is equal to the matrix B, which is the Leontief inverse, times the final demand. So what does this Leontief inverse means? Let's look at the element BSR. So to produce $1 amount, gross amount of country R, we are going to need BSR amount of inputs from country S. Okay. So if we multiply this expression by the value added, we can actually see how much value added from one country industry is embedded in the final goods produced in another country industry. So that is the VBY matrix. So if we look at each element of the VBY matrix, for example, this entry, this gives you the value added from country 1, sector 1, that is embedded in the final products produced by country R, sector 2. Okay. If we look at the matrix row-wise, it gives you where the value added produced by one country goes to. But if we look at the column-wise perspective, it gives you where the value added embedded in one country's final products is sourced from. Okay. Okay, so using this framework, we can actually compute for the domestic value added embedded in the final products of Indonesia. So the results is summarized by this chart. We see that for the past 2 decades, the domestic value added, or DVA, embedded in Indonesia's final products are increasing. And it's also worthy to know that around the 2000 global financial crisis, Indonesia reverted back to being domestic, as given by the sudden increase in DVA by the following year. So if we look at the broad sectoral categories, we see that the primary sector and the services sectors are highly domestic, while the manufacturing sectors are relatively less domestic compared to the other services. So if we look at the value added from Indonesia that is embedded in the GVC income of other economies, we see that its share is relatively low, but slowly increasing. And Indonesia has higher value-added contribution in the GVC income of Factory Asia, which is not surprising due to proximity, compared to other factories within the world. For example, Factory Europe and Factory North America. Okay. Next, we move on to the decomposition of exports as proposed by Wang Wei and Zhu in 2018. So, given the increase in global value chains, the traditional gross trade statistics will not suffice in addressing the double-counted terms within the usual trade statistics. So Wang Wei and Zhu proposed this new concept wherein gross exports can be divided into domestic value added and vertical specialization. So domestic value added can be divided into domestic value added that is absorbed abroad and domestic value added that is first exported but then finally consumed back home. The domestic value added that is absorbed abroad may be exported as final goods or initially exported as intermediate goods but then finally consumed by the direct importer. And then lastly, it could be intermediates that are exported as intermediates but then re-exported by the direct importer to a third country. Meanwhile, vertical specialization is divided into foreign value added and purely double-counted terms. So purely double-counted terms arise from the back and forth of intermediate products. Foreign value added can be decomposed further into foreign value added contained in final exports and foreign value added contained in intermediate exports. So this one gives you the composition of gross exports in Indonesia for years 2000 to 2017. We see that most of the value added embedded in the gross exports of Indonesia is highly domestic, as given by the blue bar for the value added embedded in final exports, and green bar value added embedded in intermediate use that is finally consumed by the direct importer, and the red bar, which is value added that is embedded in intermediates that are re-exported to a third country. So about 80% of the value added in Indonesia's gross exports are domestically sourced. So the same pattern can be seen in the services sectors. That is about 80% of the value added that is embedded in the exports are domestically sourced. However, let me just go back to this one. Okay. We should also note that the decomposition of gross exports in Indonesia, while it is highly domestic, it's also highly bilateral. We see that most of the shares goes to exports of final products or exports of intermediate products that are finally consumed in the by the direct importer. If we look at the primary sector, we see that it's still highly domestic, but then this part, the red bars, which is the value added embedded in exports that are re-exported to a third country, is steadily increasing, which shows you that slowly Indonesia is becoming more involved in GVC activities. Okay. If we look at the manufacturing sectors, we see that even though foreign value added embedded in gross exports are still relatively small compared to the DVA, it's larger than the other broad sectoral categories. However, if we compare the foreign value added embedded in Indonesia's gross exports to other developing Asia, we see that it's still relatively low. So it's about 11.4% for the final foreign value added embedded in final exports, and 15.4% for the foreign value added embedded in intermediate exports. Okay, lastly, we make use of the network analysis to visualize where Indonesia fares in the entire landscape of the global production. So I'll just explain what the network analysis means. So the nodes are the different economies in the ADB MRIO, excluding the rest of the world. The size of the nodes pertain to the amount of domestic value added involved in GVC-related activities of that specific economy, while the edges, the edges shows you the domestic value added that is embedded in the bilateral exports of one country to another. So for 2000, we see that the main players are United States, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Sorry. So, yeah. For 2007, the main players are Germany, United Kingdom, United States, and Japan. So this is Indonesia. We see that it's not that connected to other economies. It's mostly connected to just the United States for the year 2000. Okay, so for 2010, the shape and the structure of the GVCs became more complex. So you see, the former hubs in Asia was replaced by China, and more forward links were established among the economies, as seen by the number of the edges. And then if we look at Indonesia, it's now more connected to other economies, okay, not just the United States. And then for the recent year, 2007, we see that Indonesia further strengthened its forward ties with France and Germany for Factory Europe, Hong Kong, China, and Singapore for Factory Asia, and we have the United Kingdom and United States. Okay. However, Indonesia did not interact intensely with other ASEAN neighbors.
So before you move on, are you familiar with data visualization? Anybody taking data visualization courses? Okay, this is a very typical example of data visualization. Basically, what we did was we into a software program, we input more than 5 million data points from the multi-regional input-output tables, and the software generated this diagram. And so the size of the circle, the thickness of the nodes, the line, everything has a data point behind it. Okay, so it's not just a diagram; it's essentially data depicted, data visualized.
I'd just like to expound on this network analysis chart. So the size of the nodes is based on domestic value added that is embodied in a country's exports. So in short, it's the role of a country as a supplier of value added in global value chains. The thickness of the lines measures the domestic value added that is embodied in bilateral exports of one country, one node to another. And so it shows the extent of cross-border production sharing. And in defining the layout of the network chart, we used a force atlas or algorithm. So it pushes the hubs, those with the highest number of output linkages, towards the periphery, and it pushes the authorities, those with the highest number of input linkages, towards the center. And you see Indonesia is in the periphery. And as you go through the years, Indonesia's linkages with other countries has increased, but relative to other countries, it is relatively low. So now I will move on to GVC participation. This is an index which measures the extent of participation of a country to global value chains, to global production networks. So a country sector can participate in global value chains in 4 ways. The first 2 involves exporting domestic value added that is embodied in its intermediate goods export. So it can supply domestic value added by exporting intermediate goods. And the third and the fourth involves using other countries' value added, so importing, to produce exports or to produce for domestic consumption. Now, these 4 activities involve only value added in intermediate goods. And these are the 4 activities which relates to GVC-related activities, and it determines the extent by which a country sector participates in global value chains. So in these 4 activities, the first 2 is based on forward linkage, and the third and the fourth is based on backward participation. Now, forward participation measures the percentage of production factors employed in a country sector that comes from GVC-related activities that is involved in cross-border production sharing. And backward participation measures the percentage of a country sector's final goods that comes from GVC-related activities. Now, here is a simplified framework decomposing value added and final goods production. So based on the forward perspective, a country sector's value added can be decomposed first into the value added that is produced domestically and consumed domestically. That's your pure domestic trade. And second, it could be the value added associated in the final goods exports. That's your traditional trade. And third, it could be the value added associated in the trade of intermediate goods. And these are your GVC-related activities. And this can be further decomposed into simple and complex. The simple GVC activities involve the trade in intermediate goods that cross borders only once. And the complex GVC activities involve the trade in intermediate goods that cross borders at least twice. And this framework can be applied as well on the decomposition of final goods production. So this is the basic concept of the GVC participation index. Now let's go to the results. So first, the results show that trade-related activity as a share of value added and final goods production has declined in Indonesia. So in 2000, this was about 31.8% of total value added, forward GVC participation, I mean. And this has declined through the years by 14 percentage points to about 17.6%. And likewise, backward participation has also declined. So here we see Indonesia's participation in global value chains has declined. Forward participation was about 21.5% of total value added, and this has declined to about 17.6 in 2017. And also backward participation has declined from 21.8 to about 17%. So you can also see that Indonesia was more actively engaged in upstream production, and this is because forward participation is greater than your backward participation. So in other words, Indonesia supplied more domestic value added than it used foreign value added or returned domestic value added. And also we see that Indonesia's trade was more bilateral than global, which means that most of domestic value added of Indonesia is crossing the border only once. So in the forward perspective, this means that most of Indonesia's value added in the generated in the production of intermediate goods was used by a direct importing country for final consumption. In the backward perspective, this means that Indonesia's use of intermediate inputs came from bilateral trading partners and was used for final consumption. Now, for the primary sector, we see the forward GVC participation is much larger than its backward participation. And also we see that GVC participation is declining. Forward participation is much larger than your backward. Forward participation was about 23.8 to 35.9%. And this has declined through the years. Backward participation is much lower. It fell below 6% through all the years considered. Now, for Indonesia's low-tech manufacturing sector, this is in contrast. It involves more downstream activities, and it involves more simple GVC activities. In the medium and high technology sector, we see forward and backward GVC participation are relatively higher compared to other sectors. And in the business sector, there is low to moderate participation for all years considered. So it fell below 15% consistently over the period considered 2000 to 2017. For the personal and public sector, we see that forward participation is much smaller than your backward participation, and this is not surprising given that services are rendered within the domestic economy. And again, we see that it is declining. So overall, we see Indonesia's backward and forward participation is declining in the aggregate and across sectors. And this decline was evident even before the financial crisis of 2008. Now, there were some notable increases for some sectors, but generally, GVC participation for Indonesia is declining. Now, this is another index, the upstreamness index. So it measures the average distance of a country sector from final use, final demand, or final consumption. And so if a country is in upstream sector, it means that that sector produces a small share of output to final consumers. Now, this is the formula defined by Antras and Chor. So when a country sector produces an output, a value added is generated. That's your direct domestic value added. And to produce that output, intermediate inputs have to be used. And in the production of intermediate inputs, additional value added is generated. And so these are your second round. Your second round of value added, your indirect domestic and indirect value added. And so a country's output can be expressed as an infinite sequence of terms, which reflects the use of a country sector's output in different positions of the value chain. So starting with its use as a final good, that's your number one, and then its use as a direct input for final goods production, and so on. And so in Trust study, they suggested calculating for the weighted average position of a country sector in global value chains. And they suggested multiplying each term in the above equation with the respective production staging distance from final use and dividing that by the country sector's total output. Now, I will not go on into the details. After a long derivation, you get this formula. You get this formula. And now we go to the results. So Indonesia is moving relatively downstream. And this is in contrast to other major hubs and also in contrast to the world. So this means that the output of Indonesia is moving closer to final consumers. So a larger share of Indonesia's output is sold to consumers directly and not and selling less, and Indonesia is selling less intermediate goods to other economies. And so also this could mean that in the intermediate supply links of Indonesia is becoming weaker or becoming simpler, and it's shifting production towards the production of final goods as opposed to intermediate goods. So Indonesia's upstreamness index is close to 2, and this is because the key industries of Indonesia is moving downstream. And also because of the growing share of gross output generated by the industries that are producing close to final use. Okay, now we move on to another index, which is the index for measuring competitiveness.
Hello, I'm AJ. I'm a research analyst from the Asian Development Bank. So do you remember the concept of comparative advantage? I'm sure that you do. This is an economics building. So it was actually, if you remember, devised by Mr. David Ricardo back in the 1800s. So Comparative advantage is particularly important in the context of GVCs because it is actually the main theoretical foundation for the very existence of international trade. Remember that even if a country has absolute advantage over all kinds of production of all goods, it can still engage in international trade, right? Because it will have a lower opportunity cost in one of its sectors in producing whatever output. So we actually operationalized that concept, and we saw that we have this metric called the new revealed comparative advantage. We noticed that it has an adjective, new, because we contrast this with the traditional revealed comparative advantage measure that was developed in 1965. Remember a while ago that our boss, Joseph, said that there is a distinction between gross exports and value-added exports. In the traditional revealed comparative advantage metric, it uses gross exports and not domestic value added through forward linkages. So in that sense, it does not account for two important things. Number one, within a country, different sectors may trade with each other. And so if a sector that we do not focus on trades or exports some of its output to another country, then we do not have that in the traditional RCA measure because it was exported by another sector. But if we trace that those inter-sector trade happens within a country, then we can attribute whatever domestic value added originated from that particular sector. Also, because we are talking about international trade in GVCs, then there's actually trade in intermediates going on around the world. So we cannot say that the country's exports to another foreign country is composed mainly just of domestic value added. It contains foreign value added within it. So we have to adjust for those two things. That's what the NRCA, as proposed by WWC in their paper in 2018, accounts for. So having said that, we can look at the results. This is a ranking of sectoral NRCA. So we see here that from 2000 to 2017, there has been a gradual shift in the comparative advantage industries of Indonesia. Particularly those in color green, the fonts in color green, actually refer to low technology manufacturing industries. So, for example, there's leather and footwear up there on the top in 2017. And then we see that they're mainly dominating those, at least with NRCA or revealed comparative advantage. And then we also see here that in terms of the primary sector, it has been gradually decreasing through time. But as compared to low technology manufacturing industries or sector, it has been gradually increasing. And then we also see here the dangers of using a metric that only uses gross exports in accounting. We see here for the medium and high technology industries that if we use TRCA, then we might come up with the mistake that Indonesia has a revealed comparative advantage in that sector. But in reality, it does not. Or at least if we use the measure that was developed by Wang Wei and Zhu in 2018. Why is that? Because NRCA, again, accounts for foreign value added. And these industries in the medium and high technology sector have a lot of foreign value added because they use intermediates sourced from different countries. Also, related to that, in terms of the low technology manufacturing sector in the context of GVCs, we see using the traditional method in accounting or in getting revealed comparative advantage that the increase is more pronounced as compared to when we adjust for foreign value added in NRCA, which is the blue line. To wrap up our discussion on participation, position, and specialization, we actually did some correlations. We calculated correlations between those three indicators, and we saw that revealed comparative advantage across all these measures do not have a high correlation. So revealed comparative advantage does not have high correlation with upstreamness, and neither does it have a high correlation with backward and forward participation. But forward participation and upstreamness are actually have a good correlation or an acceptable correlation, given that they both factor in or take into consideration intermediate input. So to complete our analysis of GVCs, we actually look at different aspects that are not sort of in the mainstream. We looked at number one, foreign direct investments. We also looked at agglomeration in Indonesia, jobs technology, and the trade conflict, just to have a more holistic and robust analysis of global value chains. So I'm going to start off with a chapter or a sub-chapter that we wrote together with an economist in the ADB. This gives you a context between the complementarity between foreign direct investments and global value chains. So here's sort of a quick theoretical justification for that relationship. So when you participate in global value chains, those industries that are involved face, number one, increasingly complex demand, and then number two, requirements of the international markets. So if you're a local firm and you are facing those pressures, you need to augment your technology so that you can keep up with that kind of production. And since these are global value chains, what we're talking about, it's not done in isolation by those local firms. Those are also engaged by other firms within the value chain. So they also have, in a sense, have to invest or give transfers of knowledge to the local firms that produce these. So we see here that there are actually two factors that push for a better business environment. And with better business environments, then in the long run, it can actually attract foreign direct investments. But this is not a necessary condition for reaping the actual positive spillovers for FDI. It is a necessary condition that you have FDI in terms of getting spillovers, but it's not sufficient. There has to be something, because positive FDI spillovers are a function of, number one, the absorptive capacity of an economy, and number two, willingness of an international firm to actually transfer their technical and managerial know-how to local firms. This is just a rhetorical point. This is a very simple model of a firm. Firm is a profit maximizing. I know we all know that. And so if we have this, it's just basically just revenue. Oh, that should be minus costs. So if you're a firm and you're profit maximizing, you will come up with optimality conditions that describe that your choice of inputs are a function of the costs of those inputs. So if an input is, for example, it costs more to employ that particular input, then if you are a profit maximizing firm, then the optimal choice may be to cut down on that and choose other inputs that are more affordable and better for your profit. So we also see here that when you do maximization, it is the case that we will arrive at this point here, at this condition. When you maximize with respect to one input, you will come up with that, which is basically, it means that if you want more profit, then it must be the case that the marginal revenue from an additional unit of input exceeds the cost. And how do you do that? Well, it has to be the case that the productivity that it gives, or the additional revenue it gives to your firm, must exceed the cost. And how do you do that? We can do that with investing in terms of the technology of that input, making it more productive, and then in the process, making it more profitable for you. So it just says here that the productivity of inputs, which contains intermediates, actually matters in our analysis. So now we look at how Indonesia performs with regard to foreign direct investment. First of all, we have to start with Asia so that we can compare it with the whole region. In Asia, it has been, or the region has been one of the top recipients of FDI, actually in the entire world. And this is actually driven by GVC-related reasons, because back then, according to our analysis, there was a a lot of multinationals who tried to invest in regions or areas with lower costs of inputs. So that's why there was a surge in investment, mostly related to greenfield investments. So how is Indonesia faring? Well, it has also been one of the most popular destinations of inward FDI in Asia. If you notice, especially in the year 2018, a lot of the foreign direct investment, at least from the inward perspective here, come from Asian countries, which reflects high inter-regional trade happening and inter-regional relationships. And most of the FDI inflows to Indonesia were from within Asia, as I discussed a while ago. Oh, sorry. And it has been the case that the lion's share of inward FDI took the form of greenfield investments, which means that you have to build from the ground up for firms to actually enter the market. And we have to contrast it with M&As, and we see that M&As, which means mergers and acquisitions, has not ranked higher than greenfield investments for inward FDI at least, except for 2008, wherein it was said that there was a surge in terms of investments in subservice sectors. If you know what this phenomenon is, can you give us an idea? We know that it came from a subservice sector, but we do not know exactly what the story is behind it in 2008. Does anyone have, or you can just raise it later if you have more time. Thank you. So this is a lot of numbers here, but basically it just says that in Indonesia, it was traditionally really natural resource based, at least when we're talking about the FDI. But there's good news. In recent times, there has been an increasing inflow of FDI in the manufacturing sector. Although this FDI is still linked to natural resources, we can still say that this is a positive result, at least in more recent times. This is particularly important because we see here that FDI in the country has seen some surges or some volatility, which is actually one of the ways we characterize investment. We say that it's really volatile among the components of gross domestic product because investment is a function of uncertainty. And these second moment shocks, according to literature, turn your investment decisions or investment numbers really shaky and volatile because firms at certain points, when they face uncertainty, have to scale back on investment and hiring. So we see some upward motions and then followed by really sharp increases or decreases in certain periods of time. And one way to make investment sort of more stable is by building better business environments and as well as having a better political context in your country. And it just so happens that the overall ease of doing business in Indonesia has been, although a bit not too high, but it has been increasing through time. Look at in 2019, it has the highest overall ease of doing business in Indonesia indicator. This is good because even if you fare not so well with world governance indicators, but you actually have a good overall ease of doing business metric in your country, then it can still attract foreign FDI. It's strongest if that is the case. If you have a weak governance indicator, it's strongest. This metric is strongest in terms of the response. And just to echo what I said a while ago, it has been increasing the overall ease of doing business indicator in the region, in the country. So now we move on to agglomeration in Indonesia. So thank you.
Do you want to continue first to close the?
Okay. Basically, we have presented all the results except for the last part where we talked about how weak the domestic linkages are, as well as how Indonesia is not benefiting from the current trade war. That was going to be the next two parts. So to move on, to give a context to the discussions we will be having right after, we are going to talk about policy implications. When it comes to, unlike other parts of other domains of economics, when it comes to global value chain, there is no prescription for success, but there are sufficient and necessary conditions. Right? There are definitely necessary conditions, but we don't know if those conditions are sufficient to succeed. The first would be governance. When I say governance, I'm not talking about the form of government, but the quality of governance. Okay. The second one would be infrastructure, which Edimon alluded to earlier on. The next one would be skills and education, again, which Edimon alluded to as human development, followed by innovation. In the overall context of entrepreneurship, to succeed and in the competition for global value, in the competition for attracting global value chains, a government has to behave like a business. So these are the necessary conditions, but it does not necessarily mean that you will succeed in the competition if you have all this. So in that context, I will hand it over for the next session, and we hope to have a more vibrant discussion on the policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it has been a quite long presentation about the participation, position, and specialization of Indonesia in the global value chain, right? Well, there are too many results. I don't remember all, to be honest. But I think there are two words that have been there: decreasing, and then also downstream, right? Okay. Now I think it will be good if we can hear some comments from our other speakers. We have two speakers, two discussants here, and I will give the chance for them to join us here. Pak Wahyu Winarno and Pak Wakhid Slamet Ciptono, please join us to the stage. So Pak Wahyu Winarno will go first to give about 15 minutes comments, discussion about the result and also about the policy implication of the study. Please, Pak Wahyu Winarno, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. I will add a little bit information because the previous presenters already discussed some scary things. It seems that Indonesia will enter the recession in the next few years probably, and hopefully we will be ready to face that situation. Okay, I don't have that many to say, but some information already mentioned by Pak Joseph, which is the condition that is needed by the country to escape or at least to avoid the recession. The first example is just a picture to entertain you because the previous presenter, as I suspected, is really difficult to memorize and to understand. So it's just a picture that shows you how global value chain works. Now every country tries to work together to produce some things, but mostly they produce physical products. And my view, we have to talk about the software or some information technology artifacts. Indonesia is now one of the country who which produce some software, also some animation movies, some well-known movies like Pocahontas, Pacific Rims. If you ever watched that movie, part of it was produced by some Indonesian animators. So aside from the production of goods, we also needs to increase the capability of Indonesian designers, Indonesian artists, Indonesian programmers to export their skills so that we can get included in the global business. Yeah. This is another example just to make my presentation a little bit difficult to understand. I also put some scary pictures here. Yeah. But it is already explained by Keisha and Joseph. So I just want to underline that in the world, according to this picture, there are three main players in different parts of the world. With the newcomers is China, because in around 2000, they does not yet exist in the globalization. I mean in this connection. But now China is one of the biggest player, and they they are now fighting with the US, and unfortunately Indonesia cannot take advantage between those trade war. I don't know why, but probably we have to work together, the government and the business, to find the best way to try to get some opportunities to play some participation in the business. And I guess these are the requirements if Indonesia wants to enter the global value chain. There are some difficulties. I don't have the data yet, but these are based on the discussion with my colleagues, with my friends in the business world. Yeah. First, the business world in Indonesia needs some information from the global market, because in Indonesia it is very difficult to get the right information, like the previous presenters provide us. Yeah. They use probably big data and they can analyze it very well. But now, even in academic matters, it is really hard for me to find some information about curriculum. Actually, I would like to compare the curriculum among universities, especially in the field that I'm interested in information systems. It is very difficult to find, let's say, syllabus from several courses. Yeah. I teach accounting information system, management information systems, and those related things. I would like to compare the curriculum, the syllabus among universities in Indonesia. So far, I already obtained about less than 20 syllabus, even though there are hundreds of business department in Indonesia. And I also get that syllabus from personal contact with my colleagues in other universities. Actually, I would like to rely on internet to get those syllabus. Compared to other countries, especially developed countries, it is very easy to get syllabus, right? So in the business world, it is the same thing. If some business firms want to produce what kind of products that they should produce in the next few months or in the next few years, it is should be based on the information, right? And secondly, in the information system sector, of course, we need to have a very good infrastructure, especially internet connection. Even in this room, I try to send my presentation to Pak Wakhid. It's not that easy. I have to wait for a couple of minutes to get connected, even though I use the good operator here actually. So for designers, especially in the computer world, yeah, for programming is okay, but for animations or movies, we need to have very reliable internet connections. In Yogyakarta, there are two universities that have sophisticated internet connection. One is Gajah Mada University, and the other is Universitas Islam Indonesia. They have about 100 megabits per second. Yeah, so it is very fast. But the other campus is still suffer from the internet connection. Yeah. And third, actually, if as a country, Indonesia want to enter the global market, Indonesia needs to have a program. We have to set up kind of a team or an ecosystems. So far, we let people to fight individually to enter the global market. It is very difficult to compete with this way. So the government should have a program to help the business. For example, Silicon Valley or Bangalore in India. Actually, Indonesia is now trying to set up a new area which is not yet finite, yeah, like in Bekraf Creative District. It was set up by the previous Ministry of Information and Communication, but the President already set up a new cabinet, so I don't think that this program will be successful in the next few months or in the next few years. Probably since the Ministry of Information and Communication just appointed last month, I guess. So we have to wait a bit of time to make sure that this program will be continued. Yeah. And as also mentioned by Pak Joseph, Indonesia needs to have some skills, especially for the young generation. The trade war, I guess, is now entering new kind of competition. For example, in Indonesia itself, there are new kind of business that emerge, like online transportation, Gojek and Grab. If Pak Joseph had a chance to see some motorcycle driver with the green jacket and green helmet, those are new kind of business in Indonesia. I believe that they do not want to compete with the traditional transportation business. They just create new business that will fit for the young generation, and unfortunately, it also affect the traditional transportation. And also in the global world, now we have some new kind of business, like YouTuber. Probably in this room there are some students who wants to be a YouTuber. They get a lot of money by creating personal videos and just upload it, and attracts new subscriber or new viewers. Yeah, you can get income from that videos. But if you do this personally, as a nationwide, you cannot get those significant amount of money. Yeah. And the last requirements is the stable political situation. In the previous presentation, as you can see, in 2017, Indonesia entering some decreasing numbers of economic index. Probably at that time, we are entering the trade war between those big countries, but also in our country, we are entering the big battle between the presidential candidates. Yeah, so people in Indonesia are fighting each other for their president. So hopefully this year we already finished with that situation. So I believe we can work together to improve our economic index. Yeah, I guess that's my other comments for this discussion. I will give it to Pak Akbar.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Wahyu Winarno. I will go directly to Pak Wakhid Slamet Ciptono for further discussion. Please, Pak Wakhid.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Moderator, distinguished speakers, Dr. Harsono, Pak Edi, and my colleagues, and also all of the participants. Very good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to share my thinking about global value chains, but maybe it's based on my limitation, but because I'm still, learning about what is GVC. Okay, the title is "How Could Global Value Chains Strengthening the International Cooperation and Multilateralism for Indonesia? A balanced approach is needed." What is balance? Basically, if we talk about GVC, global value chains, we think globally and act locally. Think globally and act locally, okay? So the balance between global thinking and acting locally. Locally means Indonesia, domestic, okay? This balance, okay? And as we know that our credo, yeah, Gajah Mada University, we have a credo. Yeah, credo means spirit, is global respected and locally rooted. Globally respected and locally rooted. This is also thinking about the balance, okay? And this is our, we have to understand about Indonesia because as Dr. Rimawan stated that the main problem of us is about we don't know about ourselves, okay? So we have to know about Indonesia. This is Indonesia. Indonesia is a very big country. From London until Tehran, 4,428 kilometers. This is Indonesia. It's a very big country. Yeah. If we stayed one day in each island, because we have 17,504 islands, so we take 37 years compared to Singapore, for example. Indonesia is very big, okay? This is Indonesia, okay? And we want to be a developed country in the year of 2045. This is mission impossible or possible? Okay? This is Indonesia also, yeah? We live in the new world, this VUCA. Not static, but dynamic. And Joko Widodo has already, tried to maintain and to manage Indonesia better. And we have to read about Indonesia in the New World, yeah? Written by Arianto, Patrundu, and et al. Okay, so this is our challenge. Okay, and this is Indonesia also. It's a part of ASEAN Economic Community since 2015, and we are also has collaboration with ISDB and also Islamic Development Bank. Okay. Is our partner. To do so, the government of Indonesia should consider four big challenges. So I try to explain about the big challenges of Indonesia. This is the big challenge. This is export import. From the export import, if we use GNP formula, so Y equal to C plus G plus I, and then trade, yeah, export minus import. So this is the export import Indonesia from 2008 until 2017, and we use this CI Indonesia the last 3 years, 2015, 16, and 17, is around 2.5 until 3.6 percent compared to another countries in ASEAN. So the biggest challenge is how to achieve the CI of Indonesia at least 5% or more than 10%. It's possible. Okay, so by increasing, attracting foreign direct investment (FDI) and also the value of export of Indonesia. Yeah, and this challenge number 2, this FDI. The speakers already mentioned about attracting FDI for Indonesia. And I think Indonesia needs much more FDI in order to gain the advantage of FDI. As we know that this is, we can accelerate economic growth and also improve standard of living and so on, okay? So FDI is, we need FDI, okay? And the challenge number 3, this is a Minister of Finance, Bu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, in November 1st in Jakarta. Presented about Indonesian economics. Yeah, I would like to highlight about the biggest challenge is to accelerate economic growth in Indonesia, not only 5.0 something percent, but at least 10% in the year of 2045. So the projection in next year is around 5.3%. This based on Bu Sri Mulyani. Okay. And the challenge number 4, this is from ISDB and ISDB study. And the finding of the study of ISDB and ISDB in 2019 shows that Indonesia participation in GVC declined between 2000 and 2017 from both forward linkages and also backward linkages. So this from this study, and then recommended 4 smart recommendation. Coordinating industrial policies and so on. Okay. In addition, from my thinking, Indonesia should be more proactive and interactive to anticipate these 4 challenges by reshaping industrial strategy to become more closely integrated to GVC and also global production networks, GVC and GPN, yeah. And enjoying the long-term mutual trust and benefits. And this is a good tricky question. When I took my bachelor in this faculty in 1986, why Michael Porter used the word value instead of profit in this theory of competitive advantage through value chain? Why value, not profit? This is my questions in 1986. So based on this, I would like to share my understanding about value. Yeah. So we have to consider the philosophy of value by Albert Einstein. Yeah. So value compared to success. Yeah. Try not to become man of success, but rather to become man of value. Strive not to be a success, but rather to be a value. This from Einstein. So value is the function of benefits minus sacrifices and multiplied by long-term mutual trust and relationship. This is the basic philosophy of GVC, based on my understanding. So why value, not profit? Profit is very narrow, okay? Value is broad, yeah. Talk about benefit, not just talking about profit, just talking about money, because we cannot buy happiness using money, okay? This is my understanding also about what is value. Compare between output and outcome. Compare between house and home. If my house is building, the building is, for example, 50 billion rupiah, this automatically my house become my home? No. There is no guarantee, okay, without happiness. Okay, so house becomes home if there is happiness. Why to build the society happiness in Indonesia? This is the contribution of GVC in Indonesia. Without happiness is nothing. So house become home, okay? And this is the value chain becomes global value chain, okay? This is value, okay? Global value chain from Michael Porter, 1980, and then Gary Jeremy in 1994. This is the original GVC, and then add one more word, global. This global value chain, yeah. So global value chains are value chains from Michael Porter, this original, that can be divided among multiple forms, yeah, and spread across wide swaths of geographic space. And this is the term of global value chain, okay, from Jeremy 1994. This is a 6 dimension of GVC. Yeah. Go fast because time is very limited. This is the textbook of GVC and development 1918 from Gary Jeremy. The most important about GVC is how to make the balance between global growth and local benefit. So there are 2 mindsets, yeah. Growth mindset and benefit mindset. There are 6 key dimensions of GVC, okay, including input, output structure. Yeah. And the next, this is smile. Yeah. This smile of GVC, okay, smile curve of GVC. Why smile? Because how to make everybody happy? Smile, okay, smiling. If we are happy, we look younger, okay. If we are unhappy, you look older, elder, okay. This is the smile curve. This very very famous, yeah, curve in terms of GVC, okay. So developed and developing countries should be collaborate, okay. Developed countries and developing countries. How to make happy for everybody, okay? This is GVC, okay? This is like Pak Wing, yeah, aircraft. This is automobile cars, okay? This is example GVC in Asia and also in United States, General Motors, okay? There are many players, many countries work together to produce a car, okay? This is GVC. Automatically, we have to consider about Industry 4.0, this high-tech revolution, and also Society 5.0, this high-touch revolution. So the balance between high-tech and high-touch also important. This is the balance approach. Okay. And next, this is Indonesia. We are changing. Okay. We have to change, including to change mindset. Without changing mindset, GVC is nothing. So we have to change our mindset, our paradigm. Okay. This GVC finding the balance between growth to global and benefit to local. This is about balancing. Okay. Growth for global and benefit for local. Okay. The balance approach, yeah, this is very crucial for Indonesia. Okay. Don't be the object of GVC. We have to be in the subject of GVC. Okay? This is the mindset, okay, from psychology. So don't think about fixed mindset, yeah, static, but move to dynamic. Dynamic means growth plus benefit mindset. Growth for global and benefit for local. This is the balance between growth and benefit mindset for GVC, okay? This is paradigm shifting, yeah. And the next, this is about, okay, I would like to share about the last 3 years about Nobel Prizes in economics, okay? Why this important? Okay, 2017, 2018, and 2019. Because right now, based on my understanding, economics is changing from only thinking about econometrics, this very quantitative, to how to, to consider about psychology, about qualitative. Okay, so combination between quantitative and qualitative. So we know about behavioral economics. The last 3 years, the winner about Nobel Prizes in economics realized about this. Okay, integrating economics with psychology. This 2017. And economic growth, technological change, and climate change, 2018. And the last, 2019, understanding development and poverty alleviation. This is very critical, okay? And this is also, I would like to share my understanding about GVC in terms of ADB and ISDB study with a 3 value driven. So everything about, we have to think about value, not about profit. Okay, value is more broader than profit. Don't think only about money. Beyond money, okay, is happiness. If we are thinking about money, what happened in Indonesia? Corruption is very high. Okay, so building prosperity for the many. This is nice textbook, 2019, The Making of Democratic Economy. Okay, by Marjorie Kelly and Ted Howard. It's very important. Indonesia's economic kerakyatan. This is very critical. So GVC should consider about value driven number 1, about building prosperity for the many, not just the few. It's based on our Undang-Undang Dasar 1945, yeah, especially section 33 and Pancasila principle number 5, yeah. And the next is about this one. Yeah, based on this. Okay, this is the next about the time is very limited, so I would try to continue my study. And this is about the next, this business. Okay, business is force for good, not for greed. Okay, this is the next value driven. Okay, and this is a challenge: how to build a business based on love. So we are not to be greedy society, but how to build a kindness society. Okay? And this value driven number 3 about sustainability based on SDG agenda 2030, goal number 17. Okay, this SDG strengthen, okay, the balance between multilateral trading system. This is about international trade, international cooperation. And this is the theory about GVC, also GCC, and also GPN. So we are thinking about 3 pillars of global value chains, yeah. Global commodity chains and also global production network. this value driven. This is my conclusion about using 7S. So we are human. So value is very human, okay? Not profit. Don't think only about money. Think about value. This is why we call global value chain, not global profit chain. Okay? So this is the conclusion. This balanced approach on the leadership is very critical. And also give and take, not take and give relationships. Yeah. The happiest people are the givers, not the takers. Okay? And this is the challenging study for the future about prescriptive analytics for GVC, okay, in Indonesia. This is also very important from Dalai Lama. When you talk, you are only repeating and what you know. But when you listen, you may learn something new. I never dream about success, but I work for it. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I give to Pak Akbar.
Thank you very much, Pak Wakhid. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now coming to the open discussion, and it is now 6 past 11. I think we still have around 30 minutes. We are still on time, not that bad. Okay, anyone want to raise any question, give a comment, and especially about the result of the research that have been presented by the team from the ADB and IDB. Any comment? Any question? Raise your hand. Oh, we have some presents here for those who are raising question or giving comment. Students, Pak Adi, yeah, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to ask Pak Edimon about the shifting of the global growth from maybe one region to another region based on the research by ADB. According to Kristalina Georgieva, the new boss of IMF, the economic growth now is sinking, is something like from 3.7 to 3.5 to 3.2, now is to 3.0. And it is very brand new managing director of IMF, replacing Christine Lagarde. And she asked her, what is the hobby of Christine Lagarde? And Christine said that it is something like swimming, but not usual swimming, but synchronized swimming. You know, synchronized swimming is something like swimming with the dance. What is that? The leg is up and then the head is down on the inside the water, and it is called synchronized swimming. And then Kristalina asked Christine to capture the synchronized word as a synchronized slowing down of 90% of the world economy now. There's something like diminishing. It is something like updating new slowing down on the global economy. And based on the tension on the trade, then maybe from your research, from ADB and ISDB research, maybe there is something like new phenomenon of the moving, of shifting global growth maybe, because based on the previous research, the East Asia is the something like a vehicle of the global growth. Previously, it is about more than 10% on the average, but now becomes diminishing. It is something like 3 point something, but now maybe it's 2 point something on the average. We would like to hear from your research, maybe there is something like a shifting region of the engine of growth between countries of your, what is it, your findings. Okay, thank you very much, just that.
Okay, thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, I'm late to come here. And then actually, I just listened to Bapak Wakhid. And then the term about the global value chains. And then Dr. Wakhid says about that mindset, smile, happiness, and then create a man of the value. Actually, all of the things, it is click with my background. Actually, I'm not as economics. Yeah. Saya bukan seorang ekonomis, I just different backgrounds. But the thing that I want to know that for increasing global value chains participation of Indonesian, yeah, you just say that the participation of Indonesian is not really good in these terms, yeah. Actually, I just wonder, yeah, because when you mentioned about the mindset, smile, happiness, man, it's about humans. And as we know that the Human Development Index in our country is very not good, right? So I think it's the thing that you have para economists pay attention in your model, in your formula about the balance approach, some kind like that. So how you put directly the issue of Human Development Index, of humans, how we create the mindset in this, what we call, to increase the global value chains. Yeah, I think that this is very true, that it is not about the profit, it is not about the result, but it is about behaviors. It's about the what we call the mindset. Yeah, I think it's all of the company now, right now, is not oriented with the value. I mean, that not oriented with the profit, but it's about behaviors, how to change the behavior, that to create the value. So my question is, how you put the issue of humans approach in your theory to increase the government value chains? Thank you.
I'd like to address my question to Mr. Edimon. I want to ask you, what is the future of the global value chain in the occurring trade war if it continues to happen?
Okay, we have 3 questions here, but I want to add one, Pak Edimon. You didn't mention anything about ASEAN. I mean, okay, you mentioned ASEAN, but I mean, you didn't really elaborate how the evolution of Indonesia's participation in global value chains relate to the ASEAN Economic Community, for example. It does not seem to be very helpful for Indonesia, for example, and perhaps you can add about that. And also, I think it is good if Pak Mahinthan can elaborate further about the consequence and the policy. You mentioned a bit, but I think it is good if you can emphasize more about what really is the consequence of all of this decreasing, downstream, etc., and what should be done, etc. All right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think for the question, I think the discussion will be a lot more interesting in my view. I think the reason why we invite, I was actually surprised initially to see Grace, Krizia, Kristina, and Angelo presenting the paper. But I think at the end I was pleasantly surprised. Why? Because this young researcher should inspire young students in this university in terms of dealing with big data, doing analysis, and so on. So I hope what they give you is interesting. It could have been easier for us just to present good charts without showing you the number. But since we have many students here, we take an effort to present you the formula behind it. It turned out to be simple. Leontief, you learn in Math 1, matrix. That was what we use in terms of looking at many of these big data analysis. Of course, with IT and everything, we can deal with big data much easier now. But what we are thinking is that with some of these things we demonstrate to you, you can do it. And this publication is online, and some of the methodology you can consult with us. If you want to use it for your dissertation, for thesis, for studies, you're welcome. That was the intention, yeah? I think just to give you some of those details. On the questions for ID, I think, yes, I think our research in ISDB for many years have said that Asia has been the center of growth, the key driver of growth. Now with this trade war and everything, synchronized decline of growth, what will be the center of growth? I think it will remain Asia, I think in my view. It will remain Asia, but we are all will be growing at a slower rate. But when you mentioned about recession, no, I think it's not going to be recession. It's going to be synchronized slowdown. Why is it not recession? Because country in Asia has been dealing with many slowdown in the past, and we have done it well. So macroeconomic management capacity have increased, fiscal capacity is there. So what we are facing is actually slow external demand, which I think the country in region will manage relatively well. So another thing that is important driver is the investment. Okay, the trade war is not only about trade. Trade has declined, but what happened to investment? In the past too, the data said investment are mostly coming to Asia. Who are the sixth biggest recipient of investment in Asia, in the world? All are Asia. Okay, so this is why if trade war also affect investment, Asia will be affected a bit more significantly if investment is slowing down. But overall, in my thinking is that we will manage it well, provided that we've done it many times in the past. But hopefully things will change a few years from now. I think Emma mentioned value change. Yeah, what is the good example of value created? Local value change. I think Grab was mentioned. Gojek was mentioned. What this bigger chain makes to Grab driver, Gojek driver? Before, he was sitting in the junction somewhere under satpam's hubs, not having value, waiting, right? Waiting, maybe have one customer or two customer a day, but with part of this bigger value chain, they can serve customer from many different places. So they actually have more value of the same time that they have 20, say working 8 hours. Now they are valued a lot more. So those connection, in my view, is actually creating value. Global value chains, in fact, is also exactly that. It happens that China is the biggest part of it. They create more values there, and they have the biggest growth. And at the end of the day, what happened? 50 million people in China are out of poverty every year. Isn't that value? Isn't that human? It is human. It's not about profit. Value chains, in my view, is not about profit. Value and development at the end is about people. So this value chains, Factory Asia, China became the center. That was the reason why 50 million every year of Chinese out of poverty. So at the end, it's really about value, human value, in my view. It's not about profit. Yeah, just to clarify some of those points, I think. But anyway, thank you, Pak Wakhid, for bringing some of this value and also some philosophy and so on. Because at the end of the day, what we are doing is about people. All of these analytic numbers and everything. What is at the end of it? Can we make good policy, better policy out of it? And policy for what? Policy for improving human being, human income, human productivity, and so on. Yeah, I think that we should take it that way. Yeah, and then the future of trade after trade war. I think this is the questions that people, policymakers, are all asking. Yeah. So in the past, I think in economics, this story of flying geese. Yeah. In the past, we have this new economic progress in the region, like Thailand, Taiwan, Singapore, get the progress from receiving investment from developed country, like when Japan become less competitive in producing something, they bring it to new countries. So there is coordinations of locations based on competitiveness. Now it's no longer the case. Fragmentation of production because of cheaper transport costs. That's called global value chains. What will happen after this? I think given that with technology and everything already so advanced, and transport technology is already very cheap, I think global value chains will stay, in my view. Yeah, I think if you look at, you can ask me too. Will Gojek stay for a long time? I think it will stay, but it will evolve. But at the same time, it will evolve to different things that we may not completely know the shape. Yeah, but the most important thing is, in my view, how do we deal with some of the short-term issue, and how do we deal with some of the long-term implications for Indonesia, where we're not yet part of it. As I mentioned before earlier, why we're not part of it? Because some of the crucial thing wasn't there. We were growing, we're growing out of commodities, but we were not part of the bigger growth picture in the world. When commodity is going down, we are slowing down. And when we are trying to export more difficult than we thought. Why? Because exporting in this time for bigger value has to be through value chains. So this is the question. Yeah, I think that is all for me. ASEAN, yeah, but I sort of mentioned that actually inter-regional trade is increasing in the region, despite some of this global value chain slowdown. I think that is a good progress. But ASEAN also is not only about trade. More important, in my view, about investment. Okay, why ASEAN is joined together? Because if it becomes a bigger group of countries, it becomes more attractive to investment. And at the same time, more importantly, ASEAN is about peer pressure to do good thing, to do good reform across countries. And ASEAN has been good in that. And then if you look at most of ASEAN countries, actually a good reformer. If you look at, and some of these reform are driven by the peer pressure through ASEAN economic communities and so on. I think to be more attractive to investment, I think you need domestic reform, and ASEAN is also a good pressure in terms of supporting that economic reform. I think that is my take from some of the questions. Again, thank you. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Eddie. And thank you, colleague, for questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Pak Mahinthan, please.
Before I start, could you put up the smiley curve chart? Okay. So this graph represents specific activities in a production chain and the income that is earned. Okay. So do you see where the highest income earned or the value achieved is? One is an R&D, and here the services here is basically product marketing, product packaging. You know why those two earn the highest income? That requires human intervention, human knowledge. Right? So when you ask question about where the growth would be in terms of countries or location, it is gravitating towards countries and locations and companies that have the right knowledge. Okay, so that's essentially where the next growth sectors would be. Next, on the specific policies that you asked, I'm sure you are all aware of the publications like Ease of Doing Business by the World Bank, the World Competitiveness Index by the World Economic Forum. And what you will see is that in most developing countries, the number one impediment to investment growth and development is the quality of governance. Right? I will not expand on that because it is self-explanatory. If you looked at the top countries that are the top ranking countries in any of these indices, you will see the quality of governance is really high. Right? And of course, then it comes down to infrastructure, skills and development, and finally, in the new economy, innovation is key. Right? So when you talk about Internet of Things, big data, blockchain, 3D printing, it's all related to innovation and knowledge. So again, as Edimon mentioned in the beginning, investment in human development is key. That's my take on this.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Pak Wakhid first, perhaps a brief answer to the question or response.
Okay, thank you. The question is how to increase the participation of Indonesia in GVC. Based on my opinion, as we know that everything we do through GVC is about people. Okay, so people is mandatory, our mandatory. Okay, people around the world, so 7.4 billion people. Okay, so based on this argumentation, I would like to to share with my understanding about GVC related to the concept of economics of happiness. Okay, so right now, based on my my understanding about economics is changing. Okay, not thinking about quantitative, about money, go beyond money. Okay, go beyond quantitative. So we have to collaborate between quantitative and qualitative, both. Okay, so why Richard Taylor 2017 and then to be the winner of Nobel Prize in economics talk about behavioral economics. So for me, the government of Indonesia should develop and manage the people, not only how to increase the IQ, but also the EQ, emotional quotient. Education is not based on how to develop our left brain, but also right brain and also middle brain. Okay, as a human. Okay, not only high IQ but lower EQ. Okay, EQ is the successful of GVC, especially for Indonesia. Okay, how to develop our emotional quotient, our spiritual quotient. Okay, this is about people. So back to the economics of happiness, how to make every family in Indonesia happy. This is the obligation of the government of Indonesia. Don't just talking, but doing. Do something. Make me happy as a lecturer. Okay, make everybody happy in Indonesia, also the students. And this is about people. Okay, so make everybody in the world, in the planet Earth, becomes happy forever. Okay. Thank you very much, Pak Akbar.
Thank you. Pak Wahyu Winarno, the last word perhaps before the closing. That's enough. Okay. Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end. We are now at the end of the session. And let's applause all of the speakers together. Thank you very much for them. Thank you. But we still have the remark, right? You will lead the remark. Okay, so now we will go back to the seat and thank you very much once again for your attendance. And for me, I'm sorry for I apologize for mistakes. Thank you very much. Time's yours.